Welcome to Proyecto podcast, the official podcast of the Land Builders Association and a companion to our Proyecto magazine. By the way, the Proyecto magazine will be coming out very soon, the summer edition. My name is Gus Cabrera. I'm the president of the Latin Builders Association, and we know we're doing something right when you get a guest of this magnitude. With me today is really one of the true experts in the transportation and development space in South Florida, Ms. Alice Bravo, our good friend. Hi, Alice.
Hi.
Welcome to LBA Proyecto podcast.
Very excited to be here.
Oh, thank you, Alice. Your resume speaks for itself. I mean, I think any of us that's been involved in transportation one way or another know exactly who you are. You were with the FDOT for a long time. One of my favorite projects in South Florida was one that you oversaw, which was the Port of Miami Tunnel. Really exciting stuff. And I'm an old ditch digger, so for us old ditch diggers, they're great. You went to work at the city of Miami, you oversaw transportation, and I'm gonna make you talk about all these things. I'm just kind of framing it for you. And then at the county as well. So walk me through your trajectory, because it's really kind of pretty cool.
Well, I went to University of Miami. I'm a civil engineer. I also have an MBA, and I started as a consultant designing bridges and highways and transit projects. And before I knew it, I found myself at the Florida Department of Transportation here as a director in District 6, and I had an amazing time. Got to be in charge of the Port of Miami Tunnel, which was, I think, the most complex engineering project ever built in Florida. Certainly one of the first big P3 projects. Yep. I was also put in charge of 95 Express, the express lanes. That was actually, funding came from a national competition the U.S. Department of Transportation did. Major interchanges on the Palmetto Highway, the 18-mile stretch into the Keys. Had a big role in getting the whole Signature Bridge project approved and going. Amazing projects for our community that were much needed.
That's awesome. And rumor has it that you had the highest grade in the PE exam in Florida. A certain former district, Secretary of Transportation in Florida keeps reminding people of that. So.
Yeah. My nickname used to be Miss 99.
That's awesome. And then at the City of Miami, and you went to work at the City of Miami as a city manager?
I actually started as a capital improvements director, and after a few months, I became the assistant city manager, then the deputy city manager, and that was an amazing time. I also oversaw public works, capital improvements.
There's a lot of growth and development happening at the city at that time.
Yeah. The building, planning and zoning, and the city's real estate department, where we had all these city waterfront properties that needed long-term leases, and each one of those leases had to be approved through a public referendum. So that
was part of a few of those.
Amazing challenge, yes. and really, I think when I started at the City of Miami, the Mary Brickell Village area was just taking off. Yeah. Wynwood hadn't even started. Midtown was just starting. So to have seen everything that's been developed that came out of those first 5 years, Brickell City Center, I was involved in all of the early planning, and I think they were a true example of a signature transit-oriented development project.
That's it. No, and we talk a lot about transit-oriented developments, and now really transit-oriented communities. Every time I see our good friend Eileen Bouclé, she corrects me. She tells me, you got to talk about transit-oriented communities where we're not just kind of creating commercial spaces near transit lines, but really engaging the residential side, the retail side, even the educational side, right?
Right. And I'll tell you that working on the large infrastructure projects at DOT and then working with developers at the City of Miami, I think those two together prepared me for the transit and public works director job at Miami-Dade County. Because that's, as a civil engineer, you learn how to manage projects, but you're really building a city. And then that's what you're talking about. We have, very fortunately, the Metro Rail. And that project was intended to originally move, I think, 200,000 people a day. and it hasn't been close to that because there wasn't the density around it.
Right.
So planning that density effectively so it has that sense of community is what ultimately will bring ridership to that system. And I think given everyone's frustration with traffic and congestion and how long it takes everyone to get everywhere, our community has kind of turned that corner where transit is being embraced as part of the development strategy. 10 years ago, sometimes a developer was planning a project near a station, they might have turned the back of their development
Right.
to the station,
Yeah.
like the emergency exit. And now, again, Brickell City Center, when
Yeah.
Swire came in, they were from Hong Kong, and
They had that perspective,
yeah,
so.
people want to build 80-story towers at the stations because it's going to improve their land value.
No, and I think if you operate, in downtown Miami, if you have business interests in downtown Miami, it's so much easier. Like every time I go to downtown Miami, I take the Metro Rail, and I could imagine. Even you mentioned being a University of Miami grad. I know for a fact the University of Miami is looking, it's growing, right? So they need more student housing.
Yes.
But they're landlocked, right? They don't have the land to build on-prem. So what they do is they're looking, exploring these partnerships along Metro Rail stations because, their school sits on a Metro Rail station. So
Right.
you can theoretically live a few miles down, as long as you're near the transit lines, you can kind of get to school. So
Right.
I think that's the educational component mixed into the transit-oriented communities.
Yes, yes. And if you look at many of the issues that our community faces, they're solved by effective transportation. Affordable housing, you can connect where the housing is to the employment. There are a lot of jobs that go unfilled in downtown simply because people can't get there.
And I think that's what we're seeing with even the legislation that was passed at the county and recently at the state. At the county, the rapid transit zones that the Chairman Gilbert really championed, and I think it's really a forward-looking legislation and an initiative that's really aimed to get ahead of that, right? I think some of the legislation that we're seeing, that we saw this last session in Tallahassee, again, kind of taking those industrial areas that are near transit areas and kind of converting them into more, community-oriented projects. I think that's what it's talking about. And I want to get your opinion on the big downtown development project that I know Commissioner Higgins has been championing, because I think that's going to be really a model
Yes.
for how it works best.
Absolutely, and that project, in some part, way, shape, or form, is being modeled after the Hudson Yards in New York. So the idea in New York was they were going to redevelop that land. That was going to generate a certain tax increment, and that would help pay for a subway extension to the site. And that's what you see in other countries. Like the rapid transit zone existed, but it only covered county-owned properties. And I think Chairman Gilbert was in part inspired by a visit to Japan with the TPO that Eileen Bouclé organized, where in Japan, developers buy land for stations and approach the government and ask if they can build the transit line to connect the lines, right?
Very proactive.
Yes. So that value is there, that intrinsic value. In other places, you don't have cars. Everybody doesn't have a car. But definitely here, the cost of getting around is incrementally higher.
One thing that you and I talked about when you were still with the county was the expansion, something I think that you really led, the expansion of the bus lane of the bus stations down south, with the aim of creating more bigger transit hubs in that area. And I think that's a prelude to hopefully creating now what we're seeing, more opportunities for development in those areas. Can you kind of touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, well, I think a good example also to look at is the Dadeland South and Dadeland North Metro Rail stations. If you can see what's happened there over the years with the right zoning,
Right.
you've gotten that density around the stations, and people want to live there. Why? Because maybe they can live without a car, or maybe what would have been a 2-car household now is a 1-car household. And then you have the mixed use. You have the retail. You have the grocery store.
Office space.
You have the entertainment. You have the office space. And so now that's become your transit-oriented community.
Right.
And if you need to get from there to somewhere else, you have the effective mass transit. So the South Corridor project that's currently under construction is, in essence, an extension of the Metro Rail, but it's at grade, and it's going to use electric buses, so rubber tire vehicles. And what's great about that is you don't get the noise and vibration you would normally get from an elevated train. And to make sure that the project was as effective as a train, there are gate arms that are being installed at all the intersections. So basically, this electric rubber tire vehicle is going to move just like a train would,
right.
but at a fraction of the cost, and that's why the project is being implemented now. If it was a rail project, it would take a long time, and you'd have to go to a federal process for funding. But here, we were able to go through an expedited federal funding process called Small Starts, and we received $100 million from the federal government through that process. We received $100 million from the state. The county provided $100 million, and that's how the project was funded. And so basically, for a fraction of the cost, you get a system just as effective, just as expandable, and everything was designed, the stations, et cetera, so that they could be converted to rail one day when you have more ridership.
I'm going to take all these things that you're saying. I'm not going to release this podcast. I'm going to kind of, that way I can sound smart about transportation, just repeat them all the time. This is awesome. Good information. This is why I wanted to have you on, because I think no one sees transportation, understands transportation quite like you. You have that combination of not only the DOT perspective and the more municipal, but the county as well. So you touch a little bit, something that's always interesting, the federal government participation from a funding side on a lot of these projects, right? So there's always a transit incentive or public transit incentive angle that a lot of the FTAs of the world try to emerge themselves or push, right? You're seeing these projects that are being built along transit lines. How can we get some of that assistance, right? How does the FTA, the federal government, Build America, how can they participate or help developers build in these areas, whether it be, i.e. parking garages or things of that nature? I'm asking for a friend, by the way.
Right. I think the interesting thing to note with the Federal Transit Administration and that the funding that they have, they don't necessarily fund these transit projects with the idea of build it and they will come.
Right.
They have so many cities applying for the funds through the Small Starts and the New Starts that the people need to have come already for your project to be eligible.
Got it.
So they look at, how much ridership will a project get. So that's why the South Corridor was so successful, since it was
the density was
bus
there.
rapid transit, lower cost. One of the FTA's measure is actually cost effectiveness. So new riders, or cost divided by new riders. And so if it had been rail, when you do that number, you would have gotten a much lower ranking.
Right.
But because the cost was low and number of riders relatively high, it was a good formula. So that's actually, I think, the first corridor project that the county got in 25 years in terms of funding from the FTA.
Interesting.
So, it's not a one-size-fits-all. You have to find that right combination for each corridor. And some corridors might be built in phases. But certainly, that cost effectiveness is woven through almost all the FTA programs.
That's super interesting. I want to talk a little bit about future technologies. They're not so much, it's not so future anymore, but we'll see them in the years to come. Something that we talk a little bit about every once in a while: urban air mobility. Yeah. I'm a big fan of what's coming. I close my eyes and I think the Jetsons, and I think that's what's coming. I think by the year 2028, 2030, maybe even sooner, we're going to see flying cars in South Florida. From what I hear, South Florida and LA are the two main points of entry in the U.S. for UAM. What are you hearing?
I think what's interesting is the potential of this industry to be as cost effective as an Uber.
Right.
And part of that theory is, well, an Uber's stuck in traffic or
Right.
they can only make so many trips, while here, unimpeded, you could make many, many more trips in 1 hour,
Right.
and that's how you can keep the costs down. There's a lot of regulatory hurdles that they have to go through with the FAA, but I think certainly the development community is very receptive. I know there's projects in Miami that have been planned with air landing ports
Right.
on
Skyports and
yes,
things of that nature.
so I think definitely there's so many companies that are trying to develop this technology and are pursuing the regulatory changes, and there's actually industry groups that have banded together with these corporations. I think when there's that much interest and there's that much demand, because everybody's tired of being stuck in traffic, I think that's where things come together and things happen.
I think that the old saying, a rumor is a premature fact. So, and I think we mentioned Chairman Gilbert earlier. He's really been a leader, as has been Eileen Bouclé at the TPO,
Yes.
leaders in that kind of really getting ahead, which I think is refreshing, right? That we're being very proactive as opposed to reactive. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. What's interesting about that space is that I don't see it as a replacement of what we have now, more of an augmentation
Right.
of what we have, which is great, right?
If you look at all these emerging technologies, they help become first and last mile solutions.
Right.
And some of the companies I spoke to were actually particularly interested in having their skyports at metro rail stations, because they can bring you maybe from Fort Lauderdale to a metro rail station, and then that's how you disperse. So they're looking at longer trips. They're not looking at a 3-block trip.
No, and I think it kind of combines, because we mentioned last mile solution. Freebie is a big member of our association, big supporter. They're working into that space as well, but again, not as a replacement or as an alternative, but more of as a partner to a lot of these things. Brightline is just really doing great with their high-speed rail, and now the expansion all the way to Orlando. That's great. I've taken a few trips on the Brightline. It's really amazing, and first-class experience for me.
That's another entity I credit with jump-starting the transportation conversation here.
Absolutely.
When they announced their service, I think for the first time in 2012, and it started to happen, and people started to see them coming out of the ground with the station, that I think renewed the focus on what's being done with transportation here, and that's at the same time that we were able to get support for the SMART plan. So definitely, if a private sector company can do that and deliver that type of transportation project, that makes it much more feasible for the other corridors to happen.
Absolutely. So Alice, besides knowing everything there is to know about transportation, what do you do for fun? I mean, I know your daughter just graduated from high school. You always have a big smile on your face. You're always very positive, and always very engaging to talk to. What do you do to relax? What do you do for fun?
Well, I have to say I love to travel, and have all kinds of bucket list places I want to go to.
What's the best place you've gone to as of late?
I recently went to Istanbul.
Oh, wow. Oh, I love Istanbul.
It was
You go to the Grand Bazaar?
We went to everything.
I got lost in the Grand Bazaar on purpose.
You can be in there for days.
I know.
That's for sure. But I also just love Miami. It seems like every weekend there's like a huge event, and people come here from all over the world for these events, and we live here, so we should enjoy them as well.
What's one place you haven't gone to that you're dying to go to?
Machu Picchu.
Oh, it's closed though, I heard.
I heard that too.
Yeah, oh geez. Yeah,
I'm hoping it reopens and I get to go.
Yeah, it's a little bit too strenuous for my blood. So I like more the urban setting.
It's a good morning hike, I hear.
There you go. So that's awesome. But Alex, so great to have you.
Fantastic.
Congrats to your daughter and her graduation. I know your son's doing great as well.
Yes.
So it's great to have you.
And thank you for everything you do and that the LBA does for our community.
Thank you. Tell us, because I mean, you're into transportation. Where, folks that need someone who understands the intersection of transportation and development, they can call you. You know more than just about anyone I know in that space. Tell them how they can get a hold of you and all that good stuff.
Okay, best way to reach me is alice.bravo@live.com, or my cell phone, 305-458-7541.
And I'll get a referral fee for every one of your new clients that call you. So thank you for having us. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.